They say you never forget the sound of your first heartbreak, but Karen Millstone would argue that the sound of a fire axe smashing through her Lexus window, accompanied by the screams of her own making and a gushing fire hose, was far more unforgettable. The moment her beige SUV's glass shattered into 1,000 little pieces, her ego went with it. That sound, followed by the whoosh of water gurgling through the hose as flames engulfed her neighbor's house, would haunt her like a badly composed HOA violation letter. The entire neighborhood watched as the queen of petty policies stood paralyzed, mouth agape, drenched in her own disbelief, while TikTok captured every humiliating frame. Just 20 minutes earlier, Karen had been strutting through Oak Hollow Estates like a royal on inspection. Clutching her favorite pink clipboard, bedazzled with rhinestones and lined with color-coded sticky tabs, she marched past flower beds and driveways with the intensity of a detective in a crime show. She wasn't on the HOA board. That would require elections, and elections implied democracy. Karen preferred divine right. After all, she had lived in Oak Hollow for 11 years and, in her mind, that was equivalent to being a founding settler. Her self-given title was Enforcement Liaison, which she made up, printed on business cards, and slipped under her neighbors' doors during Christmas along with passive-aggressive notes about lawn ornament ordinances. She had already issued 3 unofficial citations before breakfast. One for an American flag that was faded enough to be considered unpatriotic, another for a rogue garden gnome, inciting visual disharmony, and a third for sidewalk chalk art that she declared borderline gang-related, because it depicted a unicorn in sunglasses. By 11 a.m., she was late for a very important self-scheduled HOA crisis meeting in her home office, where she would review photos of trash bins being left out past 9 a.m. Like a martyr of municipal order, Karen zoomed toward her house, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, Lexus steering with her knee. Her driveway was blocked by landscapers, and with her usual spot taken, she rolled her eyes and double-parked directly in front of the neighborhood's bright red fire hydrant. She figured she'd be inside for only 15 minutes, and besides, she reasoned with herself, if a fire broke out, surely the firefighters could work around her car. She hadn't even made it to the HOA Facebook page before disaster struck. Across the street, the Patel family's kitchen erupted in flames after a tragic air fryer incident involving samosas and a forgotten paper towel. Smoke began curling from the windows, and someone screamed. Neighbors flooded out of their homes as sirens blared in the distance. A fire truck roared into the cul-de-sac, only to screech to a halt in confusion. Karen's Lexus, immaculate, beige, and now completely in the way, blocked the only access to the hydrant. What happened next would become a suburban legend. Without hesitation, the firefighters leapt into action. One of them, a broad-shouldered woman with zero patience and a perfectly timed eye roll, grabbed an axe and swung it into the side window of Karen's vehicle. The glass exploded in a sparkling cloud, and moments later the hose was fed through the shattered space, attached to the hydrant, and aimed at the blazing home across the street. Karen burst out of her front door, horrified and howling. "What are you doing? That's private property. That's my car. I pay taxes." Her screams were shrill, desperate, and drenched in disbelief. But the fire captain didn't even look her way. She just barked orders and turned the water on full blast. Liberty, Karen's Pomeranian, barked furiously from the front steps, dressed in a tiny stars and stripes sweater. A teenager named Zoe, who lived 2 houses down, had the presence of mind, and perhaps the bloodthirsty instinct of Gen Z, to whip out her phone and record everything. Her video, titled, "HOA Karen Gets Hydrated by the Law," featured Karen wailing, "I'm calling the mayor!" as the hose roared and firefighters ignored her entirely. By the time the flames were extinguished and the Patels stood wrapped in blankets with grateful tears, Karen was in full meltdown mode. She paced. She gasped. She threatened lawsuits. Her car sat there like a fallen monument to entitlement, dripping wet with a gaping hole where the window used to be. A firefighter accidentally stepped on her lawn in muddy boots, and she actually screamed louder than she had when her car was shattered. The aftermath hit fast and hard. By sunset, Zoe's TikTok had over 500,000 views. Comments poured in like wildfire. She parked in front of a hydrant and screamed when firefighters broke her window? Peak Karen. Others were more savage. If this was The Sims, I'd remove the ladder from her pool. Within hours, her name trended locally on Twitter. Memes exploded. One had her Lexus photoshopped into famous disaster scenes: Titanic sinking, Pompeii erupting, the fall of Rome. But the worst was yet to come. Karen's inbox filled with messages. Some from angry neighbors who couldn't believe she blocked a hydrant. Others from strangers sending photos of hydrants captioned, "Your enemy." Someone tagged her in a viral post offering to sell Karen-proof fire hydrant covers, made out of cardboard Lexus cutouts. She tried to spin it. She made a long-winded Facebook post titled, "The Truth About the Fire Hydrant Incident," claiming the hydrant was too close to her driveway, that she was targeted unfairly, and that certain neighbors were conspiring against her with selective rule enforcement. Her post was shared mostly with crying laughing emojis and screenshots of her earlier posts citing the Oak Hollow Ordinance 4.6.2, which specifically banned parking within 15 feet of any hydrant. Even the HOA, her sanctuary, started to distance itself. Official board members released a statement thanking the fire department and reminding residents to be aware of emergency infrastructure. Karen's name was nowhere in the memo. As if fate were mocking her, the next morning someone had taped a note to the hydrant that read, "Reserved for Karen's common sense, R.I.P." Karen tore it down, red-faced and muttering. And yet, in the pit of her soul, she knew this wasn't over. She wouldn't be the punchline forever. No. She would rebuild. She would restore her reign. She would bring order back to Oak Hollow, even if she had to write 100 citations herself. Even if every neighbor hated her. Even if the fire department filed a restraining order. Because Karen Millstone was many things: unhinged, overly caffeinated, probably banned from Michael's craft store, but she was not a quitter. Not yet. Karen Millstone had always believed that the internet was a cesspool of misinformation and programmer, a place where people posted photos of avocado toast and misspelled their own children's names. She never expected to become its newest villain. By the time she returned from the auto shop with her Lexus patched together like a wounded soldier, the viral video had spread beyond Oak Hollow. National meme accounts were now recycling her humiliation with captions like, "Hydrant 1, Karen 0," and "How to lose HOA credibility in 3 seconds." She had spent the evening furiously commenting back at people with long-winded replies about legal gray areas and personal property rights, only to be bombarded with replies like, "Okay Karen," and emojis of fire trucks and axes. One user sent her a gif of a flaming trash can being hosed down. She reported that person. Nothing happened. The emotional spiral hit hard. One moment, she was standing by her window with binoculars, making notes on whose trash bins were still out. The next, she was on her knees in her kitchen muttering to Liberty the Pomeranian that the world had turned against justice. Liberty blinked slowly and yawned. Karen considered calling her pastor, but remembered she had quit her church after a dispute over the church flower bed not following symmetrical planting patterns. She had no therapist, no real friends, and now, it seemed, no control over the very neighborhood she had once ruled with clipboards and condescension. The first step of her recovery plan was what she called strategic legal retaliation. She called the fire department and demanded to speak with the chief. To her horror, they put her on hold for 13 minutes while playing smooth jazz. When Chief Tasha finally picked up, she was calm and professional, two qualities that only enraged Karen further. Karen launched into a tirade about property destruction and the overreach of authority. Tasha cut her off mid-rant and explained, with chilling clarity, the fire codes of Oak Hollow County. She even offered to send Karen a copy of the regulations along with a thank you card from the Patel family, who might have lost their home entirely if the fire hydrant hadn't been accessed in time. Karen hung up mid-sentence and screamed into a dish towel. She shifted tactics. She would sue. Not just the fire department. No, she would sue the Patels for having a fire in the first place. She would sue the teenager who filmed her, the internet platforms that hosted the footage, and possibly the manufacturer of the fire hydrant for placing it too temptingly close to curbside access. She called 3 lawyers. 2 laughed and hung up. The third offered a polite but firm "No, ma'am," before muting himself to snort with his paralegal. With legal avenues closed and her pride wounded, Karen decided to do what she had always done best: control the narrative. She arranged a press conference in her driveway. She borrowed a microphone from the community center and set up a plastic podium in front of her newly repaired Lexus, now with temporary tape on one window and a glaring red parking ticket tucked under the wiper from a separate incident at the strip mall. She wore her HOA badge on a lanyard and a silk scarf that made her look like an airline executive from 1983. She had printed talking points and practiced her delivery in the mirror the night before. She expected a modest turnout. Maybe the local paper, perhaps a neighborhood podcast. She got 2 people. One was Zoe's cousin, who filmed everything while giggling. The other was Barry from the Oak Hollow gossip blog, called a snack, who only came because he heard someone was giving away free lemonade. Karen launched into her monologue anyway, voice quivering with the passion of a woman who truly believed the world owed her a second chance. She declared the video a deep fake, accused the firefighters of excessive force, and suggested that there might be a neighborhood conspiracy to unseat her from her unofficial HOA throne. When Barry asked a question about whether she had apologized to the Patels, Karen's eyes narrowed and she responded with a deflection about their recycling habits and potential code violations on their back porch. Her speech ended with a dramatic pause and a pledge to rebuild trust and restore order. Liberty barked once. No one clapped. As the last folding chair was dragged away by the wind, Karen returned to her house fuming. She needed allies. But even her most sycophantic neighbors were now avoiding her. She noticed people crossing the street when they saw her coming. Her usual Wednesday evening code inspection walk had become a solo expedition met with closed blinds and suspicious sprinklers that just happened to turn on when she passed. Her HOA influence was crumbling. Worse still, the actual HOA board called an emergency meeting, without her. Karen tried to storm in. She brought donuts and copies of her personal inspection reports. The board president, a nervous man named Gerald with the voice of a malfunctioning toaster, met her at the door and gently explained that due to recent events, she was not allowed to participate until further notice. Karen demanded a vote. Gerald handed her a laminated copy of the bylaws. She threw a donut at him and stormed off. It missed. That night, she unleashed her wrath on paper. She printed copies of past violations, some dating back 3 years, and stuffed them into every mailbox. One resident received a citation for a Halloween decoration left up on November 1, 2019. Another got a letter accusing their dog of inappropriate eye contact. Karen spent 5 straight hours in her kitchen with envelopes, labels, and Liberty occasionally dragging an empty envelope under the table as a chew toy. By dawn, Oak Hollow was littered with ancient grievances and new threats of fines that held no legal weight but plenty of dramatic flair. And then, as if her life wasn't strange enough, a new neighbor moved in. Karen spotted him from behind her curtains the following morning. A tall man with a suspiciously calm demeanor, dark glasses, and a box labeled "Kitchen, do not microwave cats." She noted the out-of-state plates on his SUV. He wore cargo shorts and had the confident walk of someone who had never received a violation notice in his life. Something about him unsettled her. When she waved and shouted, "Welcome to Oak Hollow," he responded with a small nod and a smile that made her skin crawl. He didn't seem afraid of her at all. His name was Max Bennett. Within a day, his Amazon packages arrived. Within 2 days, Karen noticed him talking to Zoe and a few other teens in hushed tones. By the 3rd day, she caught him standing on his porch, recording something with his phone, not casually, but professionally, with the stance of a man who had done this many times before. Karen's paranoia kicked in. What was he filming? Was he one of those YouTubers? Was he a reporter? A TikToker? A documentary spy? She scribbled his name in her notepad and underlined it twice. Then she drew a small fire hydrant next to it and circled it. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. Karen Millstone had always trusted her instincts, and her instincts were now screaming one thing: Max Bennett was up to something. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but ever since he moved into Oak Hollow, things had started shifting. The teenagers didn't scatter when she walked by anymore. The neighborhood felt more relaxed, almost like a giant invisible weight had lifted, and Karen, of course, was the weight. She could feel her control loosening like a stretched-out scrunchie, and Max's calm, unbothered demeanor was a direct threat to everything she had spent years building. He didn't ask about HOA rules. He didn't comment on the weekly garbage pickup memos she printed and hand-delivered. Worst of all, he smiled at her in that way that said he was not intimidated by her clipboard or her laminated ordinances. It was infuriating. She started watching him. From the window at first, behind her thick floral curtains with binoculars she claimed were for birdwatching. Then she began timing his walks, noting who he spoke to, what deliveries he received, and how long he spent in his garage. She counted his steps. She counted his guests. And she noticed he always seemed to have a camera on hand, whether it was a DSLR, a GoPro, or even just his phone. Not in a casual way, but with intention. Once, she caught him filming the sunset from his roof, and she nearly choked on her decaf vanilla latte. Who does that? Who voluntarily climbs onto a roof just to get a better angle of clouds? Artists. Journalists. Worse, content creators. Karen hadn't survived the HOA Facebook group mutiny of 2017 to be outsmarted by some new age influencer with a drone and a smug attitude. She needed answers. So she sent Liberty across the street with a tiny camera hidden in her sweater. It was a cheap spy toy she had purchased during a short-lived phase of believing her neighbor across the alley was stealing her newspaper. The footage was mostly floor-level and filled with loud sniffing, but she swore she saw Max's laptop open with folders labeled things like Suburbageddon and Karen Gold 4K. That last one made her scream into a couch pillow for 10 solid seconds. She couldn't be sure, but something told her Max was collecting material for something big. And if he was documenting her, she'd make damn sure she documented him first. The next day, she went full surveillance mode. She installed motion sensors by her mailbox. She put a Ring camera on her window even though it technically wasn't allowed under Oak Hollow's aesthetic standards. She set up a trail cam in her front garden under the guise of tracking raccoons. The only thing she caught that week was Zoe stealing her newspaper and replacing it with a printed meme of Karen holding a "No Fun Zone" sign photoshopped onto the moon. She left it there for exactly 3 minutes before storming out in her robe and tearing it up. But Max didn't seem fazed. He kept filming. He greeted neighbors. He hosted a backyard bonfire with acoustic guitar music and marshmallows, which Karen promptly reported to the HOA via email for exceeding allowable evening decibel limits. The complaint was ignored. Instead, Gerald forwarded her an email with the subject line, "Let it go," and an attached YouTube link to the Frozen soundtrack. Then came the annual Oak Hollow Neighborhood Barbecue, the one day each year when grudges were temporarily set aside in favor of overcooked burgers and competitive potato salad. Karen had always been the self-appointed organizer, but this year, the board had stripped her of the role and given it to Max. She found out via flyer taped to her own front door. She showed up anyway. Dressed in red, white, and blue from head to toe, with a sash reading, "Neighborhood Advocate." Karen marched into the event like a homecoming queen with a vendetta. She brought gluten-free hot dogs no one asked for and copies of her revised summer HOA guidelines, stapled to paper plates. But something was different this time. People didn't smile. They didn't scurry to avoid her gaze. Instead, they laughed. Not at her face, but at their phones. Someone had made Karen stickers. Actual stickers. One showed her screaming in front of her broken car window. Another had her face photoshopped onto the Statue of Liberty holding a clipboard instead of a torch. Children wore them on their shirts like badges of honor. That's when it happened. Max took the mic. He stood on the small stage near the gazebo, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and holding his phone in one hand. He cleared his throat and smiled in that way that made Karen's blood pressure spike. Then, with a simple click, a screen behind him lit up. It was her. Footage played. Karen yelling at a recycling bin. Karen screaming at the hydrant. Karen muttering to Liberty about people who don't trim their hedges. With intent. It was edited masterfully, quick cuts, dramatic music, slow-motion eye rolls. The crowd howled with laughter. Kids were crying from laughing too hard. Even Gerald nearly fell out of his folding chair. Karen stood frozen. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked like a fish in business casual. She tried to shout over the noise, but the crowd only got louder. Her arms flailed as she demanded the video stop. Max turned to her, still smiling, and said calmly, "Don't worry. This is just the trailer." The screen cut to black with the words, "Suburbageddon, Episode 1, Karen of Oak Hollow. Coming soon." She ran home in a blur of polyester and humiliation, Liberty tucked under one arm, the sound of laughter echoing behind her like a victory chant. She slammed the door and locked it, then paced in her living room, unsure whether to cry or organize her garage out of spite. This wasn't just sabotage. This was war. The following days were quiet. Too quiet. The neighborhood ignored her. Children pointed at her from across the street and whispered. One even asked if she was the lady who yells at grass. She stopped going outside unless absolutely necessary, sending Liberty out with little notes tied to her collar instead. Her paranoia consumed her. Max was up to something bigger. If the trailer was that polished, what else did he have? Then one night, while eating dry cereal over the sink, she found a DVD slipped under her door in a red case labeled Rough Cut. She popped it into her ancient player and sat back. It was her. For an entire 30-minute episode. And it was only the beginning. Karen Millstone didn't open the blinds for 3 days. Not because of the sun, which she claimed was too aggressive in March, or because of allergies, which she insisted were triggered by morally ambiguous grass. No, this time it was shame. Deep, echoing, slow-boiling shame. She had become a public spectacle, a neighborhood cautionary tale, a punchline. Not even Liberty wanted to be near her. The little Pomeranian sulked near the back door like she was asking to be rehomed. The trailer for Max's documentary had spread well beyond Oak Hollow now. A local morning show picked it up under a segment titled, "The HOA Queen Nobody Asked For," and a podcast did a full 30-minute roast complete with fake Karen voicemails and someone doing impressions of her yelling at clouds. Inside her house, Karen had created her own bunker of denial. She muted her phone, disconnected the internet, and covered every reflective surface in the house because she couldn't stand to accidentally see herself. The one time she peeked into her bathroom mirror, she gasped and muttered, "You used to be someone." She slept on the couch, drank lukewarm tea, and reread old HOA rulebooks like holy scripture. There were crumbs everywhere. The scent of cinnamon air freshener had turned sour. Her empire was gone, and all she had left was her fading sense of importance, and a small dog that had begun growling at her shoes for no reason. And then, the letter came. A sleek, glossy envelope arrived by certified mail. Karen opened it like it might explode, cautiously tearing it along the edge with her pinky finger. Inside was a formal letter, typed on pristine stationery bearing a familiar logo, Netflix. Her hands shook as she read the first line. They were offering her a deal. A real one. A limited series based on her life. HOA Hell, with Karen Millstone. 6 episodes. Half-hour segments. Full creative input, pending standard production guidelines, of course. Her mouth went dry. She read it again. It didn't change. She hadn't misread it. This was real. It was vindication. A chance to flip the narrative. Control the story. Rebrand herself not as a villain, but as a misunderstood hero fighting for order in a chaotic world. She could already see the title card, a close-up of her adjusting her clipboard as dramatic music played and Liberty strutted in slow motion beside her. She'd call it redemption. Others might call it madness. Either way, it would be hers. She poured herself a celebratory glass of sparkling water and toasted her reflection in the toaster, which for the first time in weeks didn't make her flinch. But as always, nothing with Karen ever went smoothly. She called the number on the letter, launching into a breathless monologue about her artistic vision, including voiceovers, wardrobe demands, and a dramatic reenactment of the Hydrant incident using miniature figurines. The producer on the other end listened politely, then gently suggested they meet in person. Karen agreed. She wore her power scarf and heels that made her feel like a flight attendant with a grudge. They met at a cafe where she ordered a complicated chai latte and demanded 2 extra napkins to make a statement. The meeting started well, with Karen laying out story arcs and potential merchandise ideas, including Team Karen, tote bags and collectible clipboards. But when the producer explained the tone of the show, satirical, quirky, a blend of reality and commentary, Karen's smile froze. She didn't want satire. She wanted drama. She wanted to be portrayed as a warrior, not a joke. She wanted swelling orchestral music when she entered frame, not ironic ukulele strums. When the producer mentioned Max as a potential guest star or creative contributor, Karen gasped so hard she nearly choked on her vegan muffin. She stood up, declared the meeting a betrayal, and walked out without her latte. Still, she couldn't let go of the idea. For the next few days, she wrestled with herself. One minute she was writing episode titles like Karen, The Fall and Rise, and Clipboard Justice. The next she was scribbling angry letters to Netflix accusing them of conspiring with the HOA to ruin her life. She even mailed one. Then changed her mind and tried to intercept the mailman. She failed. He smiled and said, "Too late, Karen," then pedaled off like a villain in a children's cartoon. Meanwhile, the neighborhood continued to thrive in her absence. Kids rode bikes again without fear of citations. Neighbors chatted over fences. Someone started a book club that met on Thursdays, the same night Karen used to host her HOA enforcement briefings. Even Liberty seemed happier during walks, greeting other dogs instead of growling at mailboxes. Karen watched from behind the curtains, a plastic fork in her hand and a bowl of dry cereal in her lap, trying to convince herself they were all in denial and that chaos would eventually reclaim them without her. Then something strange happened. A few neighbors, ones who had once feared her, started sending her notes. Not angry letters or sarcastic memes, but actual notes. One thanked her for her past vigilance, and mentioned they missed her. Holiday light reminders. Another invited her to the book club. Gerald even sent her a muffin basket with a card that said, "For what it's worth, you kept us on our toes." Maybe that wasn't always a bad thing. Karen stared at the muffins for a long time. Then she ate 2 and threw the rest in the trash, just to feel something. She decided not to sign the Netflix contract. Not yet. Maybe ever. Maybe she didn't need a redemption arc crafted by editors in a studio. Maybe what she needed was to take a breath and, for once, just exist without being the enforcer. She printed a sign that read, "Close for renovation," and hung it on her front door, not for her house, but for herself. A week passed. Then another. Karen started venturing outside again. Not to inspect, not to issue notes, but just to walk Liberty. She even smiled at a child. The child ran, but it was progress. She tried saying hello without critique. She joined the book club. She hated the first book, loved the snacks, and for once, didn't argue about seating arrangements. And then came the final twist. The neighborhood gathered for a repainting ceremony. The hydrant, the very one that had started it all, was now repainted gold, with a little plaque below it. It read, "Karen's legacy, may we always leave room for emergency." Everyone laughed. Even Karen. She approached the hydrant slowly, touched it, then turned to the crowd. She raised her arms and said, At least spell my name right if you're going to immortalize me. They cheered. A strange, sincere kind of cheer. And in that moment, Karen Millstone didn't feel mocked. She felt remembered. Possibly even liked. At least until Halloween. Because someone had already ordered a dozen Karen costumes. And she was ready.